office yesterday, even when we ran to the High Court to order them to leave our offices. We have not gotten a decision and an order from the High Court. Today we come to you to address a few issues, mainly three. I want to talk about the rampant kidnaps and abductions of Ugandans. Fellow Ugandans, you heard General Museveni recently came out and actually admitted to sanctioning the extrajudicial killings of Ugandans, the kidnaps, the abductions, and the detentions without trial. You also, General Museveni, bragging about killing Ugandans and about keeping many of them in illegal detention. We condemn that in the strongest terms possible. And I want to remind all of you that we are still doubting that the days of Pandagari are back. The days of dreaded extrajudicial killings and disappearances of Ugandans. We have raised this issue with various organizations, and we intend to push on because this is unacceptable. This must not go on in our country. I want all of you to know that according to our statistics, more than 3,000 Ugandans have been kidnapped. Many of our leaders, supporters, and close allies are living in fear. Many of them are in hiding, while as we speak, we know that by the end of this press conference, we are going to get reports of many more that are being kidnapped. Unfortunately, when the police comes out to communicate to Ugandans, they give distorted information. We want to join the voices that are demanding for the immediate unconditional release of the Ugandans that are being held in various detention centers. I want to inform the country that tomorrow we shall be presenting a petition to the United Nations Human Rights Office here in Kampala to the same effect. So want to call upon all the relatives, the friends, the sons and daughters, the parents, the families of all those Ugandans that are missing, the Ugandans that are being illegally held. Please join us as we take this petition to the United Nations Human Rights Office here in Kampala to raise our concern. This will be tomorrow at 10 a.m. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to also raise the concern of the civilians that were arrested by the military and now are being tried in the court-martial. You've seen soldiers and security operatives arresting people. Imagine a situation when the army arrests you, tortures you, holds you incommunicado for weeks and sometimes months. And then later, after a lot of demand, a lot of pressure has been exerted, they present you to a military court and then remand you. We disagree with that, and we are going to legally fight that. You are all aware that on the 30th of November last year, myself and my entire campaign team, we were rounded up by the military in the islands of Kalangala. I alone was airlifted by the military and dropped off at my house. But all our colleagues were detained. Many of them, particularly the close working associates of mine, were presented in the military court and charged with an offense that they purportedly committed on the 3rd of January this year. Just imagine that. They were arrested on the 30th of December 2020 and then were charged with an offense they purportedly committed on the 3rd of January 2021. These comrades include Nubian Lee, my singing partner for the last 20 years. They include producer Dan Magic, my music producer for the longest time. They include my close friend and head of our security, Eddie Mutwe. They include Sheriff Naja, my political personal assistant. They include a whole lot of young men and women that continue to be detained by the regime. Ladies and gentlemen, these are just a few of the names that are presented to you, but very many of them are being illegally held in prisons, having been illegally tried in military courts. We want to inform their relatives and inform the nation that we shall stop at nothing to fight for their rights. And indeed, we have petitioned the High Court to ensure that the military trial stops and they are either released unconditionally or they are presented in a civilian court. Or they are presented in a civilian court. Now, that said, ladies and gentlemen, I also want to speak about the ongoing presidential election petition. You are all aware that on the 1st of February 2020, we filed presidential election petition number 1 of 2021, challenging the purported declaration of Museveni as the winner of the 2021 elections. We had concerns, the nation had concerns about our judicial system. Like we had been communicating to the nation that we went into this presidential election not because we had trust in the Electoral Commission, but we had trust in the people of Uganda. And yes, we had trust in the law, not in those that were supposed to administer the law. Having seen what we all saw, an election marred with irregularities, in our opinion, not anything worth being called an election, we decided to proceed to the Supreme Court of Uganda. Like I said, we had concerns. Among many concerns, we had concerns of the Chief Justice of Uganda, the Honorable Muwonge, who we all know had and still has close political and professional relationships with the defendant, General Yoweri Museveni. We know that the Chief Justice, the Honorable Muwonge, was Museveni's defense lawyer in the 2001 presidential election petition. We know that the Chief Justice is a former minister in the NRM government. But most recently, all of us saw the Chief Justice hosting the defendant and making statements. The Chief Justice went ahead and told the defendant that he had actually expected him to do some things in the capacity of President of Uganda in a space of a year from when they met. Now, this is a Chief Justice that has a presidential election petition on his table. But here he is hosting the defendant, hosting one party. Here he is asking for the defendant to do things in the capacity of a president, thereby clearly signaling that he had a predetermined mind about what would come out of the election petition. We know that many other justices of the Supreme Court, in particular, the Honorable Mike Chibita, who also has worked closely with General Museveni, who is a defendant in this petition. But with all concerns, ladies and gentlemen, we decided to give justice and to give the judiciary of Uganda a benefit of doubt. We proceeded to the courts. But I want to inform you, like I'm sure you've all been observing, that the judicial system, the Supreme Court of Uganda, us having gone to the Supreme Court with two intentions, either to get an annulment, either to get justice by having the Supreme Court analyze and indeed appreciate the evidence of all the wrongdoing, all the criminality, and all the illegalities in the election and annulling the election, we had also hoped that if we don't get that, at least we will have this as an opportunity to expose the lack of independence of the Supreme Court of Uganda. The Supreme Court did not wait for us to expose them. They decided to expose themselves ab initio. You all are aware that we were blocked from filing our petition on a Saturday. But again, you are all aware that the NRM lawyers were actually allowed to file their petition on a Saturday. To file their response, I beg your pardon. They filed their response on a Saturday when the Supreme Court blocked us from filing our petition on a Saturday. As you are all aware that I was held under house arrest for 11 days right from the day of election, and yet the law of Uganda provides that anybody that is aggrieved is supposed to file a petition in the first 15 days. It took, and we filed a petition within that time. But as you are all aware that working under tough conditions, we indeed had to put more evidence and more grounds. And because it was provided for under the law, so we therefore decided to amend our petition. This was acceptable, and indeed there's precedent to that. In the previous presidential election petition of Amama Mbabazi versus Museveni, the presidential election petition was amended and it was accepted. We were therefore shocked that the Supreme Court of Uganda rejected the amendment to our petition. Why? Because we had brought even stronger grounds like the fact that General Museveni was not qualified to run for president and other grounds. The Supreme Court shamelessly rejected our amendment, which was legally justified. As if that was not enough, ladies and gentlemen, we brought evidence of house arrest. We informed the court that we were unable to pack all those facts and grounds in the first petition because I was clearly under house arrest, and it had taken the High Court of Uganda to free me from house arrest. And even if it had taken the High Court of Uganda, and even when they knew that there was precedent to the fact that one can amend a presidential elections petition, they blocked us from amending, therefore from bringing more firm grounds. That exposed the Supreme Court as biased and one-sided. We have been collecting evidence, and evidence continues to come in. Some of you journalists that have been following the presidential election petitions in the past, evidence has actually been, brought into court all the way into the hearing. But because our witnesses, many of them are on the run, many of them have been arrested and detained in prisons, while others have been abducted and held in military detention. Many of them are in hiding, but we were able to make every effort and reach out to them and get that evidence and get those affidavits. But alas, we presented that evidence to the tune of 250 more new pieces of evidence in form of affidavits. But as we speak right now, that evidence is with the High Court, with the Supreme Court of Uganda, but is still being rejected. I must inform you that in the case of Kizza Besigye versus Museveni in 2001 and also in 2006, evidence kept in being, admitted in the Supreme Court all through the hearing. We have not even started our hearing but the Supreme Court is rejecting evidence. What is the reason? We strongly believe that the court is working on the orders of General Museveni. Like I said, many of our witnesses are on the run, many are in jail. This, our office, has been closed, and as you know, we've been addressing the media from my house because the military and the police has been camped here until yesterday, when it was the apparent deadline of submitting more evidence, and that is when they left. We had most of our evidence here in our office, but it's clear that the military and the police blocked us from accessing that evidence. Even when we ran to the Supreme Court, the High Court of Uganda was very quick to order the military to leave my house. But up to today, the High Court of Uganda is yet to give us a date for hearing when we petitioned it, seeking an order to the police and military to leave our office. The police and military left on their own volition. With that, we think that the Supreme Court is in a conspiracy. For example, I must also cite this. In the previous presidential election petition of Amama Mbabazi versus Museveni, the submissions went on way into a whole week. Lawyers would submit orally, verbally, and the nation, the population, the world was able to follow. But because the Supreme Court knows, in my opinion, that they would be put to shame, that this case will expose them to the last, the Supreme Court decided to reduce the hearing of this case to only 30 minutes. You can imagine that the previous presidential election petition submissions went on for a whole week. But now the Supreme Court is saying we can only submit for 30 minutes. We think that is an effort to keep the nation, the population, and the entire world in the dark about this case. And we reject that also. The Supreme Court, ladies and gentlemen, we think wants to turn justice into a mockery. And we as the National Unity Platform reject being part of that. Therefore, we want to put the Supreme Court on notice that if this persists, we are not going to be part of that mockery of justice. Like I've mentioned, we have questions about the Chief Justice, the Honorable Owing Dolo, having been a former Museveni minister, having been a former Museveni defense lawyer, and also we have seen voices and indeed pictures suggesting that the Chief Justice has been meeting General Museveni on a regular basis. And we believe that within the law, that is wrong. And therefore, we want the Chief Justice not to be part of this hearing. Not just the Chief Justice. There are other justices of the Supreme Court. People like the Honorable Mike Chibita, who we all know was a private secretary for legal affairs in Mr. Museveni's office for 7 years. We also know that the Honorable Ezekiel Muhanguzi is a relative to General Eri Tumwine, a person that the national and international community has castigated for abusing human rights, a very, very powerful regime apologist, has a relative who is going to determine the fate of his boss. So we join all voices that are demanding for them to excuse themselves, to recuse themselves from hearing this case, because we do not expect any justice from them. We also, like I said, put the Supreme Court on notice, well noting that there is precedent to the fact that evidence has been adduced all through the hearing, and we fail to understand why the Supreme Court rejects the evidence that we are bringing before it. We went to the Supreme Court to seek justice, not injustice, and we expect them to be partial. We expect them to conduct this trial in a just manner. Therefore, if that is not reached, if these obviously biased justices of the Supreme Court are still in this case, if our evidence, which is already in the Supreme Court, but they are still refusing to admit it, if they continue to block us from presenting evidence, if they don't accept the clear evidence to them, then we shall have no option but to withdraw from their court. And when we do that, the next step will be taking our matter to the Court of Public Opinion. I want to remind those justices of the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice inclusive, that they are citizens of Uganda, and we have the same rights. Every Ugandan has the same rights as they have, and they are servants of Uganda, and they are entrusted with dispensing justice. So we expect them to dispense nothing but justice. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for God and my country.
Thank you, take up.
Thank you, Joel. He was briefing me so that when I'm speaking Uganda, I don't make mistake. You know, my Uganda is not very good. Basebo ne banyabo bana Uganda banaffe abatulaba wano n'abali ebweru w'eggwanga tubalamusaako. Olunaku lwa leero twagala okwogera ku nsonga ez'enjawulo, naye okusingira ddala ensonga 3. Okusookera ddala, leero lwe lunaku olusoose ffe okuyingirako mu ofiisi zaffe oluvannyuma lw'ennaku ennyingi ennyo. Nga bwenna bwe mukimanyi nti ofiisi zaffe zaali zaawambibwa poliisi n'amagye, era okutuusa olunaku lw'eggulo, olunaku lwa jjo, poliisi n'amagye babadde bawamba wano, newankubadde nga twawanjagira dda kooti enkulu eya Uganda okujja okulagira amagye ne poliisi okuvaawo wano. Njagala baganda bange okwogera ku nsonga ey'okuwamba abantu, ey'ekiwamba abantu, ey'okutta abantu, n'ey'okubuzaawo abantu ne basibwa mu bitundu ebitamanyikiddwa. Olunaku lw'eggulo, olunaku lw'okusajjo, Mwami Museveni mwenna mwamulabye ng'ali ku TV y'eggwanga, n'akkiriza ddala kituufu y'abadde alagira era yagenda amaaso n'okulagira okuwamba bannayuganda, okutemula bannayuganda, okubuzaawo bannayuganda, n'okusiba bannayuganda mu bifo eby'enjawulo ebitamanyiddwa nga tebawozeseddwa. Njagala okubategeeza n'ennaku ey'ekitalo nti kati ffenna tukiraba nti ebiseera bya pandagaali byakomyewo. Ebintu Mwami Museveni ne bayeekera banne bye bagamba nti bye byabalwanyisa kati bizeemu. Tebyakaddamu, in fact byaddamu dda, naye kati byeyongedde. Olunaku lwa leero okusinziira ku mbalirira yaffe, bannayuganda abasukka mu 3,000 abawagizi ba NUP n'abayayinira enkyukakyuka be baakabuzibwawo, abamu nga bali mu makomera agamanyiddwa, abalala nga tebamanyiddwako mayitire. Bangi tuze tubalaba, tusanga battiddwa, abalala babatomeza amamotoka, abalala babakuba miggo, abalala